Locals know better than to go near the water, but some secrets don't stay buried. The last anyone saw of Danny McCall was his shadow leaning off the old stone ledge at Deadwood Bend, just past dusk on a Thursday. It was the time of year. The air smelled of dying pine and scorched earth. When fire bans went up, but the boys still played with lighters out in the ravine. Danny had been fishing there alone, wearing his dad's old baseball cap and a t-shirt too thin for the mountain cold. His mother, Rachel, told him to be back by 7. When the sun slid behind the ridge and he still hadn't come home, she assumed he was being a teenager, moody and slow. By midnight, she was calling the sheriff. Sheriff Gene Mallory knew not to search at night. "We'll check first light," he told her on the porch. His voice was firm, but his eyes betrayed something darker, like he knew something she'd never understand. The next morning, a search party walked the banks. They found his tackle box first, tucked neatly beneath a sycamore. Then his backpack, dry and zipped shut. And finally, by the edge of the river's deepest curve, they found his pole. It was still propped in the sand, like he'd only stepped away to piss. Only the line was slack, the reel bent. They pulled it up and found no fish, just a human tooth. Wade Haskins saw it first. "That ain't no fish bite," he muttered, pointing at the reel. Something down there yanked it hard. "Look at the tension burn on the grip. Snapped it clean." Gene bagged the tooth and said nothing. But deep inside, he knew what it meant. Danny McCall had heard the river's voice, and he hadn't been strong enough to ignore it. Larkspur wasn't on most maps anymore. A dot in the lower right corner of Fresno County, tucked between logging scars and switchback roads. There was one gas station, 2 churches, and a diner that closed if the waitress had a migraine. People came back to Larkspur when they had nowhere else to go. Like Rachel McCall. Her late husband grew up here before moving to Los Angeles. After his heart attack, she packed up Danny and their lives in a U-Haul and returned, thinking small towns were safer. She didn't know what the town whispered about in winter. She didn't know why people hung wind chimes made of silverware. She didn't know the name Red Hollow was never said aloud after sundown. After Danny disappeared, she begged Gene Mallory to organize another search. Flyers went up. Volunteers offered dogs and drones. But after 5 days, the town pulled back. Rachel stood at the chapel door, watching as the congregation passed her by, all of them muttering condolences, but refusing to meet her eyes. She felt it, the silence that fell over the town like a fog. Larkspur didn't lose people. It surrendered them. Sheriff Gene Mallory had buried more bodies in that valley than anyone else still living. Not all of them were ever found. Not all of them still had names. He drove out to Deadwood Creek alone the 6th morning after Danny's disappearance. The sun had risen blood red through the haze. His dashboard thermometer read 52 degrees, but he was sweating. He parked under the old sycamore and got out with a coffee thermos in one hand and a salt pouch in the other. He didn't go to fish. He went to listen. Wade Haskin met him an hour later. The 2 men stood without speaking for a time, watching the river pulse. Something's awake again, Wade finally said. Smells like copper and rot. Jean nodded. We knew it wasn't dead, just waiting. Wade scratched at the scar on his neck, a wound from a chainsaw accident, he always claimed. But it was round and deep, like a bite. Then Amy arrived. She parked her Subaru crooked and stormed down the trail barefoot, muttering. You feel it? The pull in the trees? The birds are gone. That means it's close. Jean turned to her. How long do we have? Amy held up a bundle of dried moss soaked in vinegar. Not long. The ground is already soft. It's seeping up through the roots. Jean sighed. Then we'll need Caleb. Wade blinked. The Finch boy? He's just a kid. So were we once. Caleb Finch didn't answer the door when they knocked. Jean and Amy stood outside the Finch house, a shotgun shack on stilts at the far edge of town. The place looked like it had grown from the mountain itself, moss-covered walls, a rusted chimney, and windows painted over with black tarp. Wade was already checking the perimeter when the door finally opened. Caleb stood barefoot, shirtless, a thin red line trailing down from his left nostril. I know why you're here, he said. Amy stepped forward and placed a hand on his chest. When did it start speaking to you again? Caleb's eyes shimmered like polished stone. Last night, same voice as before. Only now it sounds like my dad. Jean shifted uncomfortably. We need you to come with us, downstream, to the chapel. Caleb didn't argue. He turned back inside, grabbed a small bundle, a thermos, an old Polaroid of his father, and a wooden-handled knife. Got your salt? He asked. Jean nodded. You'll need more than that. The old chapel on the river's edge hadn't been used in decades. Not for worship, anyway. Its walls were warped by time and flood, and its bell tower leaned slightly, as if listening to the water. But the pews had been cleared of dust, and the altar bore offerings, jars of ash, locks of hair, and rusted coins. Wade lit 4 lanterns with a trembling hand. Caleb stood at the front, eyes closed, mouthing words not his own. Jean watched from the doorway, one hand on his revolver, the other gripping a flask of holy water. He hadn't drunk from it. Just knowing it was there calmed his nerves. Amy arranged pine needles and ash in concentric rings around Caleb, whispering old names under her breath. Some of them Jean recognized. Some were names buried in town ledgers and unmarked graves. And then the air changed. The temperature dropped. A smell like mold and wet copper rose from the chapel floorboards. Caleb's body seized. His mouth opened unnaturally wide, and a voice, not his, poured out. You dug too deep. You drowned me in roots. Wade stepped forward, shaking. Who are you? I am what your grandfathers left behind. The voice reverberated through the chapel like thunder underwater. I am the harvest they sowed in blood. And then Caleb collapsed, vomiting dark water onto the stone floor. They camped near the mouth of Deadwood Creek that night, in a grove of twisted oaks. Wade had insisted they stay near the water. If it wanted them, it would come anyway. Better to face it than to run. Jean stood watch, eyes scanning the black surface of the creek. The moon was waning, thin and red as a blood blister. Amy carved protection symbols into tree bark with a hunting knife. Caleb slept under a blanket of pine boughs, mumbling in his sleep. It came just before dawn. A ripple, a groan from the earth, then a splintering sound like bones snapping. Something rose from the water. It was tall, thin, draped in algae and muck, its body a tangled network of roots and sinew and bone, its face a shifting mass of memories. Danny, Caleb's father, Jean's dead brother, all wrong, all stitched together by the thing's hunger. It didn't walk, it flowed. Amy screamed. Wade fired first, 3 shots into its chest. Each bullet burst into the thing, like water into sponge. No blood, no sound. Jean shouted for salt. Amy hurled a pouch into the thing's path, and it hissed, recoiling. Caleb stood, eyes glowing, hands raised. "Your name," he whispered. "Give me your name." The creature thrashed, screeched like a ruptured lung, and then it vanished beneath the creek, leaving behind a circle of teeth. Human, childlike, dozens of them. A knock at the sheriff's door. Jean opened it, revolver in hand. There stood Ezra Mallory. His brother, dead 30 years, missing since the flood of '95. Skin pallid, eyes hollow, hair matted with silt. "You let it out," Ezra rasped. Jean staggered back. "You drowned. I buried you." "No, you sealed me in, with it." Ezra stepped forward, dripping sludge, veins crawling with tiny roots. "The Hollow doesn't forget its bargains, Jean. We fed it blood. Now it wants flesh." Jean raised the revolver. Ezra didn't flinch. "You'll have to choose again." Behind him, in the dark, something whispered his name. They gathered in the chapel again. Amy said the Hollow had no form until given one, no voice until answered. "We gave it shape," she whispered, "and now it wears us." Caleb had aged 10 years in 2 days. His eyes never stopped moving. He scratched at invisible things in the air. It's in the roots, in the trees, in the people. Wade lit every candle. Salt line, charm he could find. Still the darkness grew. That night, Larkspur lost power. The sky went black. The moon vanished, and something massive slithered up from the river. It pulled Rachel McCall from her bedroom window, tearing her in half on the roof tiles. It broke into the diner and rearranged the waitress into a grotesque sculpture of ribs and teeth. The town screamed, but the chapel stayed lit. Jean knew what they had to do. They summoned the river thing with the oldest name they could find. A name etched into a jawbone in the chapel's cellar. Caleb spoke it. Amy poured her blood into the creek. Wade stood ready with fire. It rose again, monstrous, sprawling, its tendrils dragging the corpses of larkspurs missing behind it like dolls. Jean stepped forward. "I offer myself." Ezra's voice shrieked from the monster's mouth. Too late. Caleb lunged, knife in hand, cut into Jean's chest. A symbol, a sigil, the old seal. The monster reared, then split open. Roots twisted, flesh cracked, teeth spilled like hail. and it screamed as it was sealed again beneath the soil. Jean's grave is unmarked, save for a circle of salt and 4 pine cones. Caleb doesn't speak anymore. Amy tends the chapel alone, lighting candles for each soul the river took. The creek runs quiet now. The water is clear. No more voices, but the wind still carries the scent of blood. And sometimes at dusk, teeth rise from the soil like sprouting seeds. The townspeople call them warnings. Others call them roots. Red Hollow waits, always.